You know what comic book fans never asked for? A sequel to Watchmen. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss the HBO limited series, Watchmen. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair, he is the man that inspired us all in this podcast. He's our very own Hooded Justice from the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. It's Tim Williams.
Hello, everybody. I don't have a quickie comeback today. I didn't prepare a good line for this.
Yeah, just the big silent type, like Hooded Justice. Yeah,
there you go.
Really,
yeah,
there you go. But here we are finishing out our March Madness, talking about Watchmen, and we're ending it with the HBO limited series, and that is officially what they call it, is a limited series, Watchmen. Even though when it was first promoted and all, it was season 1,
right,
a continuing story, and then they went, nope, we're not going to do anymore, and changed it to a limited series. Even though, okay, so it's created and written by Damon Lindelof, who is it's so funny, the movie's done by Zack Snyder, who is one of those polarizing directors. You either like him, you don't like him, or you sometimes like him and sometimes don't like him.
Right.
And I think Damon Lindelof is the exact same.
I agree.
Because for those of you who don't know, this is the guy behind Lost.
Which I loved.
I did too. I was a huge fan of Lost. Yep. I actually do appreciate the finale. I do.
Yes,
I understand the finale.
Yes.
But I will say there's some moments within the series where it kind of
it
dipped down a little bit.
And it lost its way getting to the end.
Yeah. He also did The Leftovers, which I've never seen, but I've heard that's a pretty good show.
But I've heard good things about it.
I didn't know until I was looking it up, found out that he was behind Miss Davis, which is a show that's on Peacock, which I did watch.
Right.
That is a weird show. That is all I'm going to say. I can't say whether I liked it or didn't like it. It's just weird.
Yeah.
But then I also found out that he co-wrote Cowboys and Aliens.
Yeah, I knew that, which I did not like.
Yeah, well, that's one we'll get to at some point because that is based on the comic book.
Okay.
He also co-wrote Prometheus, the Aliens prequel.
Prequel, yeah.
Yeah. He co-wrote Star Trek Into Darkness. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, that was a good one.
He did World War Z. Not bad.
Yeah,
not bad. And he did Tomorrowland,
which I liked.
It's a movie I saw. That's where I will
say
leave it.
It's not one that I've gone back and watched again since I saw it, but I didn't see the hate that people had for it because it seemed like it was enjoyable, but it's just not memorable enough to want to go back and rewatch it.
I won't say I hated the fact that I watched it. I probably didn't think I wasted my hour and a half or 2 hours, however long it was, watching it. But yeah, like you said, it's not very memorable. I've seen it, but yeah. So he is the one behind this. This does serve as a sequel to the graphic novel, not the movie, but to the graphic novel, which there is a difference. Go back a couple of weeks and listen to our episode if you're not aware of that. And the series takes place 34 years later. So they actually keep the timeline. It's 2019, which is when the show aired. And they keep with the 1985 timeline of the series. And it follows characters in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Even though the events of the comic take place in New York, the show takes place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and deals with racial tensions and the aftermath of a white supremacist attack. So lots of themes to play around with, which I'm sure we will discuss as this show goes along. The episode aired on HBO from October 20th to December 15th of 2019. There were 9 episodes, correct?
Yes, 9.
I forgot to write that down, but I was pretty sure, there was 9 episodes. I usually don't do this, but I wanted to bring this up, and I know this is probably something I probably should wait to bring up at the end, but I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. So they chose not to make a second season or to continue the show. Damon Lindelof felt that he had told his story.
Right.
Sure. It has a 96 on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wow.
That's my thought, too. It has an 8.2 on IMDb.
Okay.
But it has a 56 audience score.
That sounds about right.
I'm just the that just goes to show what I was saying, that Damon Lindelof is one of those people that he's either liked or not liked.
Yeah.
Apparently critics love him.
Yeah, I was going to say, this felt like a show, even rewatching it for the podcast, it has that feel that you can tell, like, critics really liked. Like, it has that kind of feel to it, like it was going for the awards kind of pacing and storytelling and stuff. Does it all work for a regular viewer? I don't think so. I mean, it's an interesting story, and but at a certain point, it kind of becomes its own, like it becomes a totally separate story with several separate stories that you kind of forget you're watching about characters from the Watchmen. Like it loses, like it starts off, I feel like, in that Watchmen world, but like by episode 6 or 7, I'm like, wait, this feels much more like a regular procedural, trying to investigate and all that kind of stuff, where it got a little, like most limited series, 9 episodes could have easily been 6, but because they wanted to drag it out, there's a lot of parts that just drug on too much, or storylines I really didn't need, or felt were that necessary. Especially when you get to the end, you're like, okay, well, then why do we have episode, this, and this, if this is where we're getting to?
Well, we'll definitely talk about that as we go. Let's go ahead and break down the cast. So it stars Angela Abar as the main character, who is the police detective costumed as Sister Knight, played by the extremely talented Regina King.
Yes.
Then we have Judd Crawford, played by Miami Vice's own Don Johnson.
Yes, very brief role.
Yeah. Wade Tillman, a.k.a. the detective Looking Glass, played, again, wonderfully by Tim Blake Nelson.
Yes.
Kyle Abar, a.k.a. Dr. Manhattan, spoiler, played by Yahya Abdul Mateen II, who many comic book fans will recognize as Black Manta from the Aquaman movies.
Yep.
Then we have Will Reeves, a.k.a. Hooded Justice, the older version of him, which I've got thoughts about, played by Louis Gossett Jr., and the younger version of him, played by Jovan Adepo. Adrian Veidt, or Osmandius, played by Jeremy Irons, hamming it up as much as he can.
Yeah.
Laurie Blake, the Silk Spectre, played by Jean Smart. Then we've got Lady True, played by Hong Chow. Senator Joe Keane Jr., played by usually comedic James Wolk. And then I wanted to throw in the Red Scare, another one of the detectives. We never find out his real name, played by Andrew Howard. Mr. Phillips, played by Tom Misson. And Miss Crookshanks, played by Sarah Vickers. So we'll talk about who we want to talk about, but I'll just go ahead and ask. Who of this cast do you want to see again? And who do you wish would be catapulted away?
There were a few characters that I really liked. I did like Jean Smart's character. I think she played that role very well. I think
she played the role very well, but that was not the Silk Spectre from the comic.
Right, yeah. The person that I couldn't stand was a Red Hood. Is that what you called him? The
Red Scare?
Red Scare. Yeah, Red Scare just irritated me the whole... Every scene he was in, I was just like, just shut up and move on. Why are we... I mean...
With his red tracksuit and ski mask.
And thick Russian accent. Yeah.
Yeah, the one of the detectives, masked costume detectives, that least looked like he put any effort into his costume.
Right.
I mean, even the panda head dude, like... At least... Yeah. Yeah, so my thing about... And we'll go ahead and talk about this. We're talking about the cast and the characters. So yeah, Jean Smart did a good job in the role. But this was not... It's not... It's not Laurie from the comic book. That's my biggest complaint, because she would never... So for those of you who don't know, she's called Laurie Blake in this show. That's not her name in the comic. That's not her name from the movie, whichever way you want to go with it, because her last name's Jupiter, or Giuseppe, or however you're supposed to pronounce it, but then they go by Jupiter, because her dad, who is the comedian in the original Watchmen, his name's Edward Blake. So what they imply, and there was a whole website dedicated to this show called Pedopedia. Petey being I didn't list him because he's almost a forgotten part of this movie, but he's the agent that goes with Laurie.
Oh, right. Yeah. You don't see him at all, like, after episode 6. So, yeah.
In fact, I want to go ahead and throw this out because I don't know if you did any research and found this out.
No.
Do you know that he was Lube Man?
No, I did not.
Yes. So that was supposed to be something that I guess they were going to continue if there was further seasons.
Right.
And it wasn't. It was actually officially revealed later in like some interview or something.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I forgot about Lube Man because once again another storyline
random
like,
part of an episode.
Yeah.
Where she sees this guy that's got the silver bodysuit on, and then he covers himself in lube, slides into the sewer, and you never see or hear from him again.
Nope.
But found out it's supposed to be Petey.
Okay.
But on the Pedopedia, it kind of gives some background. It was kind of an ancillary way of building what had happened between the 1985 Watchmen and this show. And you end up finding out that Silk Spectre, or Laurie, took her dad's name, which is my biggest issue, because the Laurie from the comic would never have done that.
Right.
I mean, she fusses with her mom about that. You know, she knows that he's, who he is in terms of what type of guy. She never would have done it. She scolds her mom because her mom forgives Blake.
Right.
And when she does, Laurie shoots back in the comic and says that that's pretty much the same as like forgiving. I can't remember exactly how she words it, but she pretty much says that's like forgiving concentration camps during World War II. Like, you just don't do it. So I had a problem with that. That was my biggest issue with that character. I would say, and I'll go ahead and reveal this, I want more Looking Glass. Like, I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't disagree with that. Like I said, there's a couple, like, I wouldn't mind following Angela a little bit further. Of course, that seemed to be the big, cliffhanger if they were going to go into season 2 to see if she did get Dr. Manhattan's powers, that whole thing. But yeah, I would definitely take more Looking Glass for sure.
Yeah, but I definitely would completely launch Lady True. You talked about how annoyed you were every time Red Scare was on the screen. I was with Lady True.
Yeah,
I really was. And that's another one of those things where I think the show just got stumbled on its own feet because they tried to have this bad guy and that bad guy, and this bad guy was overtaking this other bad guy.
Right.
Yeah. You just had too much going on. What were your thoughts? It's hard to talk about this cast. I think the performances were fine.
Yes.
My biggest issue in terms of acting performance probably goes to Yahya Abdul-Mateen as Dr. Manhattan. I don't know. I think Billy Crudup solidified that role, I think, so well in the movie. Right. And I don't know if it was that it's a TV show, so even the makeup and the effects, it made him look different, but then in his performance, he didn't look like Dr. Manhattan. Like, to me, Dr. Manhattan has a little bit of a confidence as well as a sadness to his look. And to me, Yahya Abdul-Mateen, who I have nothing against as an actor, but in terms of playing Dr. Manhattan, I felt that he always looked like there was almost like a lost child. Yeah. I would say.
Yeah. He didn't feel like the same Dr. Manhattan from the comics or from...
No, absolutely not.
Or from the movie. And I don't know the movie as well because I've only seen it, I think, once or twice and not recently. But I had been reading the comics, getting ready for the episode. So, yeah, I agree. I think, once again, I think he's a great actor otherwise, but it didn't seem like the best fit for this show.
No, because one of the whole aspects of the comic book is that Dr. Manhattan it was kind of Alan Moore's way of how a person, a human being who gets superpowers would actually make them less human.
Mm-hmm.
But in this show, to me, it's like he's becoming he's like he's more human.
Yeah.
And
I would agree with that.
it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
My other question, and again, I don't know how familiar you are with the original comic. So again, spoiler, how does Dr. Manhattan die? Because
it's not real clear.
Should that be possible?
I wouldn't think so.
I mean, you had in Watchmen, you had where Ozymandias kind of exploded him.
Mm-hmm.
But then he just reforms himself, and he was like, hey, that didn't work when I, was first human. I became what I was because of that. Why do you think it would work again? But then also, there are multiple Dr. Manhattans, as we see in the original Watchmen. But even in this show, there's one on Mars. They've clearly established that.
Right.
So is that Dr. Manhattan, did he just cease existing, or is he still there?
Is this just a variation of Dr. Manhattan, but not the Dr. Manhattan?
Yeah, I don't think they did a good job to explain how this kills Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, like a lot of Lindelof stuff, there's as many, he leaves you with more questions than answers, and things kind of get lost in the storytelling.
Yeah.
For the sake of just being mysterious or different.
Yeah, I agree with that. So yeah, I think, and we'll get into this as we do the quote unquote moving panels section. Because again, I'm not going to call it moving panels because this isn't based on an actual comic. It's inspired by a comic,
right?
Absolutely. But taking the comic part, so you've completely gone against Silk Spectre and who she was as a character. You've completely gone against the mythology behind Dr. Manhattan as a character.
Mm-hmm.
And then even Adrian, Jeremy Irons is great, but Ozymandias is supposed to be just this emotionless, stone cold, like, I'm not going to say killer, even though he is a mass murderer, but he's not supposed to really feel anything. He's not supposed to care.
Right.
And the fact that, and they give a little bit of that, but they turn him into a caricature of this character.
Mm-hmm.
It completely, I almost scoffed when he passes gas in the trial.
Right.
Like, that's not something Adrian Veidt would do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they made a joke out of the character of Ozymandias. I don't know.
Yeah. That whole storyline too. It's like, it seemed cool at the beginning because it was like, ooh, what's this? This is kind of mysterious. Then you find out who he is, and I'll just say, I'm not a big fan of storytelling out of sequence.
Yeah.
It works sometimes, but this seemed like it was like, oh, let's show her this stuff at the beginning, and then the last 3 episodes try to explain everything you did before by showing that, oh, this didn't really happen when you thought it did. It happened at this point. And it's like, at that point, it loses its effectiveness to me. Like, then it just seems like, well, it was all a trick. You're just trying to trick me from the onset and make me feel stupid. So I didn't like it. But, so yeah, his whole, on, what did Dr. Manhattan call it? The planet
Europa.
Europa.
Yeah,
him on Europa, and he's making, making new humans to use as experiments and watching plays about things. It's just weird. But that's what Lindelof likes to do, show you weird stuff. But then, once again, like, once you get to the end, it's like, but why do we need to see all that? You could have told us that he was there, and then, Lady True finds a way to get him back. It's just,
But yet, like you said, timeline-wise, that was several years before the actual events of the show.
Right.
So I just, when she buys the property from the farmers and the crash that happens on their field, that's when he came back.
Mm-hmm.
that was the other thing is, and I will say the Snyder movie had some issues with just relying so heavy on flashback. And this show did that as well.
But the comic is like that too. The comic jumps between the 40s and the 80s a lot too. So, but it's a little easier to follow. I thought in the comic.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop culture roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from three nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.
All right, well, let's just go ahead and jump into it. I do want to start off just like the show starts, and this might get a little deep for some of you. But I do want to make note of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre that pretty much kicks off this show. It is a real event.
Yes, absolutely.
I will say, call me ignorant. I did not know that.
Me either.
Until I saw it and did a little research.
Yeah.
But I did find out there's a lot more to it. And so I do want to talk about that just to give it more of
context.
As well as just give it more of the I hate to say the word notoriety, but to inform people a little bit more and better than what the show, because the show just kind of glosses over it almost a little bit. So on May 30th of 1921, a black man named Dick Rowland was accused of assaulting a white woman named Sarah Page in an elevator. The story goes that the two of them were seen entering an elevator. While the elevator doors were closed, they heard a scream, and then she accused him of assaulting her. We don't actually know what happened. The next day, so June 1st, a white mob gathered outside the courthouse demanding his lynching. There had actually been several lynchings that had occurred over the past few months. And there were several black residents who came to the courthouse in his defense. Tension grew. Shots were fired, and being outnumbered, the African Americans retreated to a location of Tulsa called the Greenwood District, which has sometimes been referred to as Black Wall Street, and that was only because it was a very prosperous African American community. Then, in the early morning of June 1st, white residents attacked the Greenwood District. Black residents of Greenwood fought back, but they were outnumbered. So let me again make that clear. This was happening not in downtown Tulsa. This was happening in an area of Tulsa called the Greenwood District. But of course, they were outnumbered, and it is believed that the massacre lasted about 18 to 24 hours. Once it was all over, 35 city blocks were destroyed. 800 people were treated for injuries. And it is believed, because they don't have good records, but it is believed that as many as 300 people died. One of the things I was curious about was there is the part where you see an airplane go over and they're like throwing bombs out of the airplane. I did want to look that up, and I found conflicting reports on that one. So I will say I did look up information and was provided information, because I actually reached out to them, from the Oklahoma Historical Society, as well as the Tulsa Historical Society and the Greenwood Cultural Center. I reached out to all three of them, asking if there was any information they wanted me to relay. They just sent me to some websites to look through. And like I said, I found conflicting stuff. The airplanes, there's some reports that say that this actually was true, that there were airplanes flying over and people were shooting from the airplanes. There are other reports saying that there were airplanes, but it was just like upper police, like checking for where the big areas of mob activity were. So I can't say there was anything solid, and I'm not going to say whether that part is true or not, but just overall, and I will say that Lindelof and the creators of the show put a lot of detail into it, because like the movie theater, I saw actual footage of that movie theater with the sign being destroyed and all that. So there was a lot of detail in it, but I think that it's a moment in history that, like you and I both, a lot of people don't know about. And so I felt that with my platform here to give it a little bit more notoriety. And it was a very jarring and powerful way to kick off the series.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and move on for that. But that, of course, that event kicks off all the events that are going to occur in this show. And it eventually leads to the creation of what the Watchmen comic and all indicate is the first masked crime fighter, and that is Hooded Justice, who was a child at the time of the Tulsa race massacre. But he survives with a baby who he then marries. That was a little weird, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
He becomes, like I said, the first masked superhero. Again, vigilante. There's no superhero other than Dr. Manhattan. But here's the thing. So what they did, again, this is a sequel of Watchmen, but what they did, they took a character that is only in like one scene of the entire comic book.
Right.
He's the one that saves Sally from being, pardon the word, but there's no other word, being raped by the comedian.
Right.
He's the one that beats the comedian down, and that's it. In the comic, as well as in the Watchmen movie, it is believed that he is a white man.
Right.
Which I know the show kind of also makes everybody think, hey, we thought he was a white man. I will at least say that I liked that once we get his story, we find out that he did paint the area around his face white, so that if, since that was the only part of his body that could be seen, people would think he was a white man. So I did like that. But it was so weird, though, to take this. Again, I'm fine with them giving him a backstory. And I was fine with the way they connected it. Because it makes, in my opinion, it makes sense for him to be a black man.
Yes. Yeah. The story they gave to how he had the noose around his neck and the hood, it made absolute sense. So, yeah, I agree with you there.
So where they get a lot of this, and again, I don't know how familiar you are with the comic book, is Hollis Mason's Under the Hood. So in the comic book, there are excerpts from that book.
Yes.
And in that, Hollis actually talks about how Hooded Justice's first appearance was stopping an assault and a robbery of a man and woman in Queens.
Right.
So that's what the show does. They show that the first time he does anything is to save this man and woman. The second being a supermarket stick-up, which they then show in the show. So they do keep that connection. Hollis then discusses how Hooded Justice and Sally Jupiter actually had a relationship. So first off, thinking about the fact that they had a relationship, but then if you see what you see in the show, you're going, wait, how is that possible?
Right.
Because it's really not flat out said that he's homosexual in any of the comics.
Right.
Or at least any of the original comics. We're not going to get into the stuff they wrote in the 2012 when they started doing the Before Watchmen stuff.
Right.
But the other problem I had is that in Under the Hood, Mason also talks about how Hooded Justice approved of Adolf Hitler.
Right. I remember
which
that
would completely negate the fact that he's a black man.
Right.
The only thing I can think of is that they decided to just go with it because maybe if they had thrown this into the show to at least explain it, even with a throwaway line, maybe it was something that Will chose to do to help keep his identity.
Yeah, that
just
can
kind
make
of
sense.
going along with it.
Right.
Especially once we find out in the show that they really that the Minutemen don't really care about justice.
Right.
They just more care about publicity. But of course, it's also implied in Under the Hood that Hooded Justice is actually a German circus strongman named Rolf Mueller.
Right.
Which he connects because they both died at the same time. They were both roughly the same build. In the Watchmen movie, when he stops the comedian, the man is even speaking with a German accent.
Right.
Which also helps with the whole approving a Hitler thing and all that. But like I said, the show, if you separate it from the comic, which is, you're going to hear me say this a lot, when you separate it from the comic, the show's origin makes sense.
Right.
You know, the hood and the noose that we've already talked about, you know, sadly, it is a way to connect it to a black man. I love the Bass Reeves connection. I mean, for those, and especially with the fact that it's connected to Hooded Justice, which many people believe are white. For those of you who don't know this, Bass Reeves is believed to be the inspiration for the Lone Ranger.
Right. Yep.
So again, we take a real life black man, we turn him into a white man for the masses. I did find it weird though that he idolized Bass Reeves and then his name was Will Reeves.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also wondered if there wasn't supposed to be, because they mentioned this too, also a Superman connection. Because of course there's George Reeves and Christopher Reeve who played Superman. But yeah, he's the first hero, just like Superman was in the comics. During the Tulsa race massacre, he is sent away from his home, which is quote unquote being destroyed.
Right.
His parents, you know, realize that that's the best way to save him, is to send him away.
Right.
His wife is a newspaper journalist. So yeah, there's some Superman connection there. But first off, what were your thoughts of, because there's pretty much an entire episode that is just the story of Hooded Justice. What were your thoughts on them creating this origin and this character of Hooded Justice?
I mean, I think you've kind of said a lot of it already. It does, in context of the show, it makes a lot of sense. And I do like you got to see, it's connecting a lot of dots, especially at the time that it comes in the series, because we've seen the little boy at the beginning, you know, you don't really know what happens to him. Then, of course, you see the old version, Lou Gossett Jr., and there's that connection. It's the same person. But then to find out that he was Hooded Justice, and of course he's now lived to be 100 years old or whatever.
Which I want to talk about as well.
But there are parts of it that I liked and there are parts that I didn't like. And I think they were just trying to throw so much into that story. It got, once again, the show, some parts needed to be, you know, edited, and then others needed to be, maybe they tried to edit too much and it got all jumbled together. That's kind of how I felt like his story was like. And maybe it was the way that they, which once again, very artistic, very much what the critics liked of, okay, let's have Angela take the nostalgia pills, which I love that name of the pills.
I did, but again, you connect it to the comic, and the comic nostalgia is a perfume.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So, yeah, that was a little strange to name it the same thing.
Right. So you've got Angela kind of experiencing it firsthand. So of course it's switching from, you know,
some of those edits were pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was well, once again, very well done. I'm not knocking the style and how it was told, but it gets a little jumbled, and it seems like they're trying to tell a whole lot of story in like a 40-minute timeline, which I won't say it got confusing, but it was just a lot to take in.
It was a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was okay. I mean, I can't say I loved it. I can't say I hated it. I think it was okay. But like I said, I'm agreeing with you. In context of the show, it makes a lot of sense. If you have comic knowledge, there's going to be things that are going to be problematic. And I think that's where the show overall has challenges, because it wants to be connected to the comic, but like most adaptations, they're going to use things they want to use and discard things they don't, or, you know, act like some of that stuff isn't there anyway.
Yeah. How old do you think he was in 1921 as he flees from the Tulsa race massacre?
I was thinking like 8 or 9. I would say under 10.
So you realize that would make him like 106, 107.
Yeah.
I needed that to make more sense.
Yeah, like they never really explain that. Yeah.
Like how has he lived that long? And 2, how is he because essentially you find out he doesn't need the wheelchair.
Right.
That he can walk. really as alert as he is. I mean, it's Louis Gossett Jr. I didn't look up how old actually Louis Gossett Jr. is.
He's up there.
Let's do just a quick search right now. So Louis Gossett Jr. So he was born in 1936. So he's 87. So and again, I know you're not going to get 100-and-something-year-old actor,
right?
And I mean, we can argue. Betty White was still very active and whatnot as she was approaching 100. Mm-hmm. But I needed something more to explain how this dude lived to be 106, 107, and appears to still be going.
Right. Yeah. Now, are we to believe that, once again, because I didn't finish the comic, so Hooded Justice, like, it seems like he stopped being Hooded Justice that night after he burned down the warehouse or wherever where all the white supremacists were doing the filming? Or
so the way it's laid out in the comic is when the Keenak takes over, which prevents. Which I don't know if you saw that you made that connection.
Yeah.
Is that was the senator's dad who was the one that made it so outlawed vigilantes were outlawed.
Right.
But in the comic, it's actually mentioned that Hooded Justice was asked to come before the Un-Americans Committee, and he refused, and he just disappeared.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which he very easily could because no one had any idea what he looked like.
Right.
And that's all that's mentioned when it comes to the comic is that he just disappeared. But yeah, I do want to point out, if anybody listened to our one shot last week, we talked about Tales from the Black Freighter. I do like that there's a little nod to that. So there is the pirate flag that is on Europa. And then the fact that Veidt is using dead bodies to help him get rescued, which just like in Tales from the Black Freighter, he uses his crewmen's bodies to help build his raft. So I found that interesting. What do I want to talk about next? Did you, because I do want to talk about the ending.
Okay.
But let's first talk about, before we get to the ending, did you notice, so in the original Watchmen, there is clearly the symbol of the smiley face with the blood on it.
Right.
And that has become,
synonymous.
The symbol. Right. Yeah, because it not only represents the death of the comedian, but it kind of represents what Alan Moore was doing in the comic of taking the beloved comic books and putting a darker twist to it and subverting kind of the idea of a superhero. Did you pick up on the egg symbolism throughout the series?
I knew his egg was very symbolic, yes, but
of course, most people are thinking we're talking about the Dr. Manhattan egg, but it starts off from the first episode.
Yeah.
When we are first introduced to Angela, she is making eggs.
Yes.
And in fact, you see from underneath the bowl, it is the smiley face. And if you look very close in the top left, you see a little bit of blood in the yolk.
Right.
And then they even use the egg as a symbol or as a metaphor, if you will, for racism. Because Angela talks about how it's important to separate the whites from the yolk, and how that the whites will, you can, make a meringue or whatever it was she was making, but if any yolk gets mixed in, it ruins it. And so there's a lot of going ahead and setting the theme of the show in that.
Right.
In the second episode, Will, Hooded Justice, Louis Gossett Jr., actually makes eggs while Angela is out, and he kind of helps himself, goes to the grocery store, and comes back, and even though he's supposed to be a prisoner of Angela's. And then the Beastie Boys song Eggman actually plays during the closing credits of episode 2. In episode 3, when we're introduced to Lori, she is, talking on the phone to Dr. Manhattan, or she believes she's talking to Dr. Manhattan.
Right.
And in her joke, she actually says the line, "You can't make an omelet without breaking a couple of eggs."
Right.
Then Will actually repeats this to Angela in the final episode, which is what allows her to remember the eggs at her house. In episode 4, the title Watchmen is made up of egg yolks.
Yep.
And you even see it drip. We're shown the farm couple that True buys their farm. They are selling eggs.
Yep.
And in that episode, Cal, is making pancakes, and they show him clearly, cracking open some eggs. There's a gap, so that's the first 4 episodes. There's an egg reference in the first 4 episodes. Then they no more egg references until the end.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 8 is, of course, where Angela meets Dr. Manhattan, and that's where we are introduced to the idea of his power being inside of an egg, where he makes an egg appear out of nowhere. And then near the end of that episode, Angela smashes the carton of eggs in the kitchen. And of course, in episode 9, not only do we have Angela eating that egg, but I will also point out that the ship that True sends to rescue her father, Vite, again, spoilers, is shaped like an egg.
Yeah.
And when he gets into it, he is sprayed gold, kind of looking like the yolk inside of the egg. And of course, the final episode ends with the closing credits. The song I Am the Walrus is playing, which of course has the famous line, I am the Eggman. So there's a lot there. What do you think the symbolism of the egg was meant for? Like, what was the purpose behind the egg?
Well, I think it stood out to me when she's having that conversation with Cal, Dr. Manhattan, where they're talking to her, but also talking to her father 10 years ago.
Yes.
And she says, ask him why, how did he know? Yep. And he's like, oh, it's the chicken or the egg, which came first. They both came at the same time. And so that to me seemed to be the overall, like that was a key moment of the show to like, oh, she's like, oh, I set all this into motion. I was like, yep, you absolutely did, because you should have known not to ask that question, because he never would have known if Dr. Manhattan had not asked that question. And so she really set everything in motion. But did he know she was going to set that in motion even before then? So it's just a lot of questions that make more questions.
Yeah, I had the same problem in the Watchmen movie of, if Dr. Manhattan is supposed to experience past, present, and future all at the same time, his own past, present, future all at the same time, then it's very inconsistent. It was in the comic, I will admit, as well. There are several times, I mean, just going to one example, when the comedian shoots the Vietnamese woman who is pregnant with his child, Dr. Manhattan almost reacts as if, no, don't do it, even though he should already know he's going to do it.
Right. And then the comedian even says, you could have stopped me.
Right.
So
but that they explain away with the fact that Dr. Manhattan always believes that he can't change anything.
Gotcha.
That what has happened,
he just makes it aware. He's just aware of it.
Happens, yeah, because like I said, he's living it all at the same time, so he just says it's all happening. So at least can say they explain that. But there is a lot in this show too where I'm just like, I don't understand how his sense of time is supposed to exist. But no, I agree with you. Yeah, the whole what came first, the chicken or the egg, they play with that. I also think they do the same thing with Dr. Manhattan and Angela's love story, because he's in love with her before he falls in love with her.
Yeah.
So that kind of that same idea too. What came first, the chicken or the egg?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also think that it's supposed to be a metaphor for life. I think what Lindelof was trying to convey with this show is instead of it being about the end of something, which is really what Watchmen was about, was that this one's supposed to be about a rebirth,
right?
Which is ultimately the ending, where Angela eats the egg, and then it's what comes next. Which brings me to that question: what do you think happens? Like, does she get Manhattan's powers, or does she fall in the pool?
Okay, this is going to be weird, but I think she falls in the pool. But I don't think that means that she didn't get his powers. She just may not understand what power she has and how to use it yet. So that's what I kind of thought season 2, if they would have done a season 2, I would have thought season 2 would have shown her falling into the pool, thinking that she didn't get the powers. And then over the next course of a week or a month or a year, things start to happen where she begins to realize, oh, I have gotten this power, but it's just not, I haven't been able to recognize it or harness it the way I need to yet. So that's kind of where I thought it was going.
Yeah, for a creative aspect, I kind of agree with you. I think that would have been the way to go had they continued the show. Yeah, because the show, just like Alan Moore does, does kind of focus on how power corrupts.
Mm-hmm.
They show, of course, with Senator Keene being a member of Cyclops and Judd Crawford being a member of Cyclops, and just kind of how power corrupts and all. The thing is, though, is I think they're also saying that with Angela's experiences, because there's also the aspect of what did John do to deserve his powers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the show is also explaining, because they do so much to provide the background and show where Angela comes from, that I think they're also maybe giving her a bit of an origin to show that she might actually be worthy of the power of Dr. Manhattan.
Right.
But again, I don't even think Dr. Manhattan's dead. So
right.
Be what it is. Lastly, I do want to ask you this. What was your, we won't say worst, but what was your best? What do you think the best episode was?
Because I watched them all back to back just about. So let me do a little quick.
Oh, I'll go ahead and give you mine.
Okay.
My favorite episode was the one that tells Wade's story.
Yeah.
I will say it didn't have an awful lot of really a strong connection to the overall story.
No.
But it was such a good story. Mm-hmm. And again, one of the reasons why I said earlier, I would like more Looking Glass. Mm-hmm. I would like more of a look into just that character alone. But that would probably be my favorite episode, to be honest.
Yeah, I would. That's probably, aside from the first episode was really good. I think it was a great way to start the show and really kind of get you engaged early on. But just a standalone story or a standalone episode, yeah, I think that one might be the best one. Yeah, I'm looking at all the episodes. Yeah, I think, I would agree with you. That's probably my favorite. But like you said, it didn't give us. It was one of those. It's one of those episodes that's like you said, it's not part of the overarching story necessarily, but it was important for character development for him.
Yeah.
To make us kind of care about him, because up to that point, he was kind of like very much a side character that you wanted to know more about, but you didn't. And so that was a good backstory.
I did find it interesting that they almost, I really wish they would have explained a little bit more how he developed his ability to read people.
Yeah.
Because they almost made it feel like a superpower.
Yeah. But what I wondered was, and I thought about it too, and I was like, well, by showing that he got so fooled at the carnival,
it was
like he was like, I'm never going to be fooled again, and I'm going to develop this skill. But yeah, like I said, I would like to see how he developed it, but I think that was the
I just wanted to know a little bit more about how he developed that skill.
Yeah, because it does feel like a superpower.
Yeah, when he has the quote unquote date with the girl that ends up also betraying him.
Right.
Yeah, the fact that he's just very nonchalantly and very quickly able to read her, it kind of reminded me of that show Lie to Me that used to come on. But again, don't want to talk about worst episode, but I do want to talk about a couple of plot holes, at least plot holes in my opinion. So the first comes with the fact that the Tulsa police, or I think you're maybe even supposed to assume the entire state of Oklahoma, the police are masked, and some of them wear costumes, even though it is a federal crime to be a masked costume vigilante.
Right. But I guess because they're not vigilantes, they're just costumed law enforcement?
Yes, but if the idea is to hide their identity, let's say that a serial killer from Texas is apprehended in Oklahoma. How does that work for the legal system? Because you can't reveal the identity of the Oklahoma police.
Gotcha.
Like, how does the federal government allow that to happen?
Yeah, that's a big hole right there.
I think my other issue was, and Lindelof has come out and said that it was supposed to be a misinterpretation, but I don't get how the 7th Cavalry took Rorschach's journal and based their entire existence off of Rorschach's journal. Yeah, I just kind of had a problem with that. And then my other biggest issue was with and this is more of a character flaw like we've talked about, is Veidt making the confession video.
Mm-hmm.
He would not have done that.
Right.
Completely goes against character, but even if he did do it, the fact that there's a room full of people, as we then later see as he's making the video,
Mm-hmm.
we know from the comic, like when he makes the squid, he then kills everyone involved in making the squid. In the movie, when he makes the Manhattan bomb, he then kills all of the scientists involved in making the Manhattan bomb. So why didn't he kill everybody in the room when he made this video?
Right.
And if he did, we didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that would have completely negated True's mother, because True's mother was there.
Right.
So I kind of had a problem with that. He would not, the fact that there is evidence of Ozymandias doing the squid and being the one behind the squid and the idea behind the squid, that just completely, again, goes against Alan Moore's whole character of Ozymandias in the comic book. So that was my big issue. All right, but let's go ahead and get into it. If it's not clear enough, let's see. Bag it, stack it, or trade it. Go ahead, Tim. What do you say?
This is probably one that I would stack. I don't think it's bad enough to trade, because there were parts of it that I did like. Being a self-contained series, I think it could have had a second season, but I think they might not have had enough to really build on. I think they had seedlings of what they wanted to do going forward, but then where does the story go? But it's definitely not one that I would want to like. It's not one of my top favorites, so it's not going to be one that I'm going to bag. So yeah, I would stack this one.
Yeah, I officially decided to go with stack it, but I will say it was really close to a trade it. Because as we've said, if you separate it from Watchmen, if you look at it as just a show that just has the superhero comic book connection, it's a pretty good show.
Oh, yeah.
It's a pretty good story.
Yeah.
But someone like me, who is a fan of Watchmen, I mean, you're going to see it because it is connected to Watchmen.
Right.
But it has all those flaws that we've talked about when you actually do connect it to Watchmen. And overall, the biggest is that Alan Moore, when he created Watchmen, placed essentially a negative light on superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
Damon Lindelof completely turns that around and puts more of a positive light on superheroes. Like I said, he ruined the Watchmen characters. He ruined Dr. Manhattan, who is he's too emotional in this show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He seems, as I talked about, too oblivious to what's going on. Veidt is a joke. Again, everything he does contradicts the Ozymandias from the comic book. Laurie, again, same thing. She would not be as accepting of the comedian to take his last name. I was fine with her being an FBI agent who tracks down vigilantes. I mean, that just seems fitting, especially if she's trying to avoid jail time, which is what they explain.
Right.
That her and Night Owl are both arrested, but then she decides to work for the government, which again is tying it to the comedian. That's what the comedian did. When the Keene Act happened, he chose to do that. My biggest issue as the show, if even disconnecting it from Watchmen, was, as Tim has talked about, just the overpack of information and then the complete jumble of villains. The 7th Cavalry, which is actually a part of Cyclops, but then they don't matter because True is actually the ultimate villain.
Yeah.
So yeah, it all turns, and then it's all just kind of packaged up, I think, just a little too neatly there at the end. I will say, I think a little bit of a plot hole is they kind of imply, I like the idea of Ozymandias having to constantly have little baby squids raining down just to keep the facade going. But then when he leaves for Europa, who's doing that? Because it really looked like he had to push a button to do it.
I know
he made it automated.
Yeah, I know he made it kind of like it's all random because it's an algorithm that he created, so it's completely random. So maybe he just he might have set it on a timer or something. Yeah.
and then to use that to be the thing that ultimately destroys True.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then also just putting a complete end to Cyclops, just wipe them out, done. It just seemed a little too wrapped up.
And it seemed like there weren't enough people for that to be all of Cyclops. There was only 15 people there for the...
Yeah, like 20 or 30, but yeah, I agree. I
guess so they were the head honchos, I guess, but still.
Well, then you got the whole 7th Cavalry. We're the entire 7th Cavalry there as well. So, I don't know. There's still a lot. But yeah, I go with a stack it, but it's a low on the stack it column. You know what?
It's in the back of the box.
Yeah, as I've said several times, I typically own all of this stuff, and I do own this series on actually DVD, not Blu-ray, but I have it on DVD. And I got to be honest, it's not one that I plan on pulling out and rewatching anytime soon. I mean,
honestly, I watched this when it originally came on, and I've never really wanted to go back and watch it until you mentioned doing the episode. I was like, oh, I'd rewatch it again. And I was trying to remember, did I watch it weekly? Because this was one that came out, one episode per week. I think I watched this one, waiting a week to see it. So maybe it was digestible a little bit easier that way. Maybe you forget a lot of the plot holes that way. But when I'm watching it, this weekend, I watched 3 or 4 episodes on Friday and then the rest of them today, back to back to back. It's a little harder to digest all in one sitting, I think.
Yeah, no, so I didn't have HBO when it originally aired, so I didn't have a choice until it was fully released to watch it all once, HBO Max, whatever you want to call it now. Which is actually how I watched it. I didn't watch it actually on my DVD copy. But I do agree with that. This is not a show you can just sit down and watch all 9 episodes in one sitting. Not only would that be way too much of your time, but yeah, you do have to take a break from it just to let your head process. But there you have it. We have discussed Watchmen as best we can, trying to keep to 1-hour episodes for each week this month of March. There is, of course, so much more we could discuss, but hopefully you feel like we've gone into as much depth as we hopefully could for you. But we'll go ahead and end things here. Thank you, Tim, for joining me on this conversation of Watchmen, the TV series.
Been a pleasure. Always glad to be here. Look forward to the next one.
All right, thanks everybody for today. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.